everyone. Today I'm going to be interviewing Iye. That's how you pronounce her name, right?
Yes.
Cool. She has an amazing Instagram account, which blew up. How recently did you start that account?
I've had the account for close to 3 years, but I really started focusing on animal rights and interconnected oppression within the last two. But it's taken off like in
Okay.
the last few months, actually.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I highly recommend following her Instagram page, which I'll link in the description box. But today we're going to talk about radical veganism versus white veganism, because that is your whole MO. Um, so first you can introduce yourself. How long have you been vegan? Anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I've been vegan for a little over 3 years. My 3-year anniversary was in March of this year. So I went plant-based first of all, and I transitioned slowly to vegan because I originally started it for health reasons. My dad, he has liver cancer, which he's in, treatment and therapy for, and I knew that cancer ran in my family. So I watched Forks Over Knives, and that inspired me to embark on a plant-based diet. And then because I felt so healthy, I looked up what veganism was just, because it came across through YouTube videos. And I did not want to be, part of a system that was exploiting other animals because, with my dad's situation and seeing what it's like for other human beings to suffer, I didn't want to be the cause of any other being suffering. And that was how I made the connection to animal rights as part of my ethics as well.
Awesome. Yeah, it sounds like we have somewhat of a similar journey. I also watched Forks Over Knives. That was what got me interested in veganism. But that's cool. How's your dad doing now?
Well, he was in remission for a while, but it seems like he's had a spike. So right now we're dealing with that. He's in radiation, but he's holding up. So yeah, we're doing well.
Well, I wish him the best and everything. That sounds rough. But yeah, so my first question for you was, how would you define white veganism to a normie vegan who might be resistant to the term?
Yeah, so the main thing that pops up is the word white is a trigger for a lot of people who are not used to hearing themselves referred to as a race. The term that a lot of people are using that's going around is called white fragility, where it kind of like this feeling of uneasiness creeps up on people from hearing the word white. Because what's been going on with the Black Lives Matter movement spiking up again with the brutal killing of George Floyd, it really brings up a lot of feelings of, white guilt for a lot of people and not wanting to be held responsible for, the mistakes that other people have made. So what I do when I describe white veganism is I describe that it's not about race, it's not about skin color. It really has to do with the social construct of whiteness, which has to do with basically the geography, history, of white people and of colonialism and that entire era, and also imperialism and white supremacy. So it has a historical and academic context for the word white. It's not referring necessarily to skin color alone, but that legacy. And also people of any race or any skin color can practice, white veganism because anybody can uphold whiteness as a social construct. So I defined white veganism as a form of veganism that does not recognize the interconnected oppression that all people experience.
That was great. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I know a lot of Republicans have emphasized this idea of personal responsibility to the point where leftists, myself included, sometimes will recoil at the term. But can you just explain why it is important to take personal responsibility and go vegan, despite there not being a such thing as ethical consumption under capitalism?
Yes, and I think that this is such an important question, and I'm so glad that you asked it because there is no ethical consumption under capitalism, people wonder why bother, and that does need to be addressed because there has been research that's been done that says that people are more willing to follow your philosophy if you align your actions with your beliefs. So no one is going to want to go vegan if we're doing it for ethical reasons, but we're not backing it up with our actions. And because we want this to be a worldwide movement, we want to back up what we're doing with our actions. We want to consume as ethically as possible. And we also don't want to get overwhelmed to the point where we're obsessed with perfection. There's absolutely no way in the modern world to be perfect at this philosophy of living, because there's so many ways that we interact with other animals and with our environment that precludes us from perfect consumption. Because here where I live, in a major city, the water that I drink, if I drink city water, may be filtered through bone char. The tires on my car might have some animal substances. My cell phone, it's been through processes that may have interfered with other animals. And also the precious metals in our phones, we know comes from, child slavery in Africa to mine those precious minerals that go into it. So the personal responsibility aspect is just to align our actions with our morals. But what we're focused on is minimizing our impact on others. We're not extremists. We're not trying to completely eliminate our impact on our environment and on our world.
Amen. Yeah, I've always said that just because there's no ethical consumption under capitalism doesn't mean there's no such thing as unethical consumption. And when there's a better alternative, even with slave labor, sweatshops, stuff like that, I would recommend buying like secondhand or supporting a business that's less shitty. But
Yeah, absolutely.
And then my third question, how do you respond to vegans who say veganism is about non-human animals only, stop making it about people?
I think that this is like an ironic thing that they say, because when they're saying it from the perspective of someone who's also human. So you have to understand that this is a movement that is in collaboration and in cooperation with other animal species, but humans are also animals, and we have to be the ones to carry out this movement. And we have to consider the fact that animals, they do have a voice, they do fight for their own liberation. Animals jump off, slaughterhouse trucks all the time. They find ways to get through fences and escape for their own freedom. So we're advocating on behalf of animals, but animals are also independent in the sense that they know what freedom looks like and feels like, and they try to get free as far as they are able to do. So what I would like those type of people to know, and what I say to them is, yes, of course, this is a movement that primarily focuses on animals. That's the focus of the movement, but the scope is much larger. Myself as a Black woman, I'm oppressed not only from being a woman, because women experience sexism, but Black people also experience racism. Those are things that are connected with speciesism, racism and sexism, the patriarchy. All of those things are also reasons that animals are oppressed. So we have to think of the interconnectedness of oppression that affects not only non-humans, but humans as well. Because we want humans to join the movement, we need them to feel safe and comfortable in our environment.
For sure. Um, so how do you think vegans should approach the issue of workers' rights within the meat processing industry?
I think that the best thing that vegans can be doing is, first of all, remove the veil of the holier than thou attitude and the judgment. No one chooses to work in the slaughterhouse industry. It's definitely a last resort. And we also have to keep in mind in this movement that a lot of times we find that it's easier to basically penalize migrant workers and people who are at the very, very low level in the animal agriculture industry. And those are the people who are most at risk for exploitation. Sometimes they're even human trafficked to work in those types of jobs. So the main thing that we need to be focused on is more on the corporations, especially when it comes to the animal agriculture industry, but there's also the issue of migrant farm workers who pick our produce. So what we can do for them is listen to them. We can work with organizations such as Food Empowerment Project to see exactly what they need. They're asking us to boycott Driscoll's Berries right now because they're not paying their workers enough. We can advocate for them to have workers' unions, which they're demanding because that's the best way for them to be able to advocate for themselves. So we need to lose our judgment. We need to be advocating for the people who are most at risk, and we need to be listening to them for what they need and supporting them.
Yeah, I actually have an interview on my channel from like over a year ago with one of my activist friends who used to work at a slaughterhouse. But then he became vegan while he was working at a slaughterhouse, I believe, and quit. And now he's a vegan activist.
That's
So
amazing.
how amazing is that?
That is so
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, so these people aren't lost causes. They are like most of them don't want to be working there. Nobody wants to be working there.
Absolutely. And we also have to think about the fact that in the slaughterhouse industry, people don't do every stage of the process. It's run by big corporate companies who segregate different parts of the process out so that people reduce their empathy. So they're not involved in making the ethical connection of the slaughter process from start to finish. And it's done intentionally to desensitize people from their jobs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so true. What do you find the most frustrating about non-vegans who criticize these very real issues within the vegan movement, considering they're not vegan?
Yeah, that's the main thing, right? On one side of things, I can empathize with them because they are real issues that they're bringing up. But I believe the only way to be effective at advocating for corrections within a movement is to first join the movement. I think that you don't get to criticize any movement when you're not in it. If you're not in, the anti-racist movement, you can't tell anti-racist people who are advocating for Black Lives Matter, this is how you protest, and this is how you advocate for your own justice. You have to join the movement first, and then you're free to give any advice that you wish. But coming from the outside, I think that their opinions and their judgments may be relevant, but it's not useful. And we can listen to other people who in the movement already have the same criticisms and work with those types of people, but it's invalid when it comes from an outside source.
So true. That's what I've actually noticed about several articles that I've read about white veganism, is it seems that they're written by non-vegans or vegans, people who identify as vegan, but maybe they're plant-based, but hold speciesist views. And that's why I appreciate your page so much, because you are this radical, like Black vegan who's involved in the racial justice movement as well as veganism, and you hold a very strong anti-speciesist stance, and
No,
it's
thank
super
you.
refreshing.
Thank you.
An extension of that last question actually was, what is your response, particularly to non-vegans who bring up food deserts as an excuse not to go vegan themselves? And also, if you want to add, like, what should vegans be doing to alleviate this problem?
That's a great question. So the main thing is for the non-vegans who criticize the vegan movement based on the fact that food apartheid exists. And I prefer the term food apartheid over food deserts, because food deserts implies that people, in a sense, chose to live in those areas, and those areas are completely devoid of food. They have food, it's just very low quality food, and it's actually structural and political oppression that causes the apartheid to exist in the first place. So what I would say to them is join the vegan movement first of all, and then advocate for food justice and food sovereignty. There's no use in saying you can't go vegan because other people are at a disadvantage, because you're actually contributing to the problem by not being a vegan. You're contributing to it because when you're eating animal substances, animal flesh, and fluids, there's a bunch of waste that goes into the land that rural marginalized people live and people of color live in, and that affects their communities in terrible ways, in the sense that they get higher instances of chronic diseases like cancer, heart disease, and diabetes, because they're exposed to all these toxic chemicals, and because they're eating these really poor quality foods. So if you go vegan, you can reduce your impact on the environmental crisis, which would be good for everybody. And also, when you join the vegan movement, you can continue. If you are truly passionate and not using it as an excuse, you can advocate for food sovereignty and food justice while you're in the movement. You don't have to choose one or the other. You don't have to choose to be not vegan and care about food apartheid, or to be vegan and not care about it. You can choose the causes you advocate for while being vegan.
One thing I would add is these people are conflating like healthy eating with veganism. And if you go into food deserts as like a privileged person, you will find that there are options available, like even at gas stations, fast food restaurants, you can order vegan. But what I would say to that is that you have to understand that people that grew up in these areas are probably have food addiction, but also they are time poor.
Is it more challenging for underprivileged people to go vegan? Yes, and I think it's important to acknowledge this. Life in general is more challenging for the poor. Literally everything is more challenging if you're cash poor and time poor. Exercising, preparing healthy meals, parenting, getting enough sleep, staying sober, etc. But that doesn't mean that teachers and doctors should shy away from promoting the ideal amount of exercise, sleep, and alcohol, because a healthy lifestyle isn't easy for everyone. Likewise, vegans shouldn't shy away from promoting veganism, but we should express interest in fixing the problems that make it more challenging for the working poor. The problem with food deserts, though, is not the lack of access to vegan food, but the lack of access to whole, unprocessed, healthy foods. It's ironic that carnists will claim that a vegan diet is nutritionally inadequate, but then turn around and associate veganism with healthy, fresh, organic produce. It's almost as if a vegan diet can either be healthy or unhealthy, depending on what it consists of. Contrary to what leftists on Twitter will have you believe, it is entirely possible to be vegan and poor. Where there's a will, there's a way. But, as I said earlier, I understand that it's harder to muster up willpower when you're living below the poverty line. A lot of people in these communities struggle with obesity and food addiction, and taste equivalent alternatives to their favorite comfort foods are limited and unaffordable. Imagine living back in 1970 before any of your favorite vegan comfort foods such as Gardein were even invented. It was totally doable, but objectively more challenging. You gotta admit it required more effort then than it does today. Being vegan is way easier than most people think it is, but change is not easy for everyone.
If that makes sense. Like people will say, oh, rice and beans are so cheap, and you might be able to find rice and beans in a food desert, but it requires time and preparation, and we just want to make it easier and more accessible for people to make these changes by reducing, I guess, I'm kind of going on a tangent, but
No, that makes total sense. I think that the biggest point that you brought up is with time poverty. And the second point that you brought up that was so important was the fact that people may lack the understanding and the resources to completely rethink their diet and change up what they eat. And I think that's so important. The fact that if you're time poor, you're not going to be looking into educating yourself about how to create this brand new diet. So I think that the way that we can help advocate for people in those situations is really to find the spokespeople in those areas, maybe even partner with, doctors or nutritionists or people who are very close to the community. Don't necessarily come in as an outsider and start telling people what to do. And that's a part of the whole structure and concept behind interconnected oppression, is that we're not saviors. We're not, going into community to say, we're going to moralize you or give you these ethics. People in these communities, they already have ethics. They already have morals. They may not be living totally in alignment with them just because of their zip code, because there's a lack of education and a lack of time to plan these ethical decisions around. So work with people who are in the community who are already advocating, or who could easily be taught about better ways. For example, doctors, they love to give their patients better advice about what to eat. So you can talk to, doctors who are already working with people in the community about plant-based options and giving them guides to give to their patients, for example. That's one way to do it, but not necessarily to assume automatically that, people who are in disadvantaged situations are immoral or unethical because of their diet. They're just lacking on certain things that we could easily help them with in the right ways.
It looks like we're on to the last question. So what do you think, or why do you think so many people are resistant to veganism, even if they recognize the injustices of factory farming and these industries?
Well, this is a good question that can go on and on for ages because I think that there's so many answers to this question. The basic ones that we always mention are, the way that meat tastes and dairy products and cheese. It's an addiction. Like, we're addicted to meat, we're addicted to dairy, we're addicted to animal substances because we've eaten it for a very long time. The majority of us have, and you just become used to it. And then also there's the cultural aspect and the familial aspect. You tie this back to, your grandma's favorite, cake that she made for your birthday when you were little. And you think, well, embarking on this new lifestyle would mean that I'm giving up my family traditions and I'm giving up, my culture. And then I think another reason is because of societal pressures. People want to fit in. And actually, Faunalytics did a study and they said that was the number one reason people stopped being vegan is because of peer pressure and the desire to fit into, the mainstream society where, approximately 97% of people are not vegan in the world. So we're seeing the advertisements on the TV, on the billboards to eat animal substances. So I think that those are the primary reasons that they might recognize the fact that animals in the animal agriculture industry suffer terribly, but they also think in the back of their mind that there's a better way to exploit animals. And I think the main reason behind that is speciesism. And speciesism is one of the first forms of oppression we're taught since being a baby. And it sticks with us our whole lives. It's very ingrained. Even after you become vegan, you still have to actively work to dismantle speciesism and become anti-speciesist because it's so deeply ingrained in us. So I think that we have to start thinking about educating people about the moral rights of animals and why it's important to allow animals to have their autonomy on this planet. So I think it's just so many factors that intertwine, that come together, that form that resistance because people think of themselves first. They think of humans as far more superior than animals based upon abilities and intelligence.
I'm very sorry for the super abrupt ending there. Technology hates me. But I hope you enjoyed this interview. Big thanks to Iye for her time, and be sure to go follow her on Instagram, which I will link below. Alright, peace out.
Yo, how when me eat them, I wonder when me eat. When me tell them say me no eat no fish, no meat now. How when me eat them, I wonder when me yam. When me tell them say that I'm a vegan man. How when me eat them, I wonder when me